And
I started
so
too late.
this is a bill that's near and dear to my heart. Parking mandates are the first land use issue I took an interest in.
Aaron, I have a question. Do you want to wait till the end to answer questions, or do you want to go bill by bill?
You know, let's do questions on AB 2011 now, and then we'll take questions on the
Yeah,
rest of the
I think it
bills
might be
together.
easier. Otherwise, they could get off. So could you go back up one slide?
Yeah.
And then,
All right.
let me see if I see some hands or people. Can someone handle the chat?
Yes, I will. The first question is El Camino Real specific plan, is that the neighborhood plan that would exclude El Camino, parts of El Camino?
So there's a specific section of code that is referenced in terms of adopting a neighborhood plan. And I would think that though that the specific plan and a neighborhood plan are functionally synonyms. So the key question I think is, under the El Camino Real specific plan, are there parcels remaining with commercial only zoning that don't allow any residential use?
Okay, Rita's got a question.
I was going to say I can probably answer the question at the ECR specific.
Okay.
How the ECR specific plan was designed is basically there are 3 areas that allow primarily mixed use or residential, or zoned for primarily mixed use or residential, and then there's kind of corridors between them that are zoned for commercial. Is the basic orientation. I have it buried the actual map buried somewhere, but that's the basic idea.
And so on those corridors in between the nodes, it's still commercial only zoning that doesn't allow housing as one of the uses. So that might be excluded from AB 2011. I think that would be honestly a great question for City Council to ask the city attorney, and they can provide a definitive answer.
I was gonna say, in my capacity as chair of the planning commission, it's on my list of things to ask staff when they give us our annual review of new housing laws presentation, which I don't know when it's going to be, but I would assume it is sometime in the next couple months.
The other thing I'll say on this is, I think there's very much a possibility of future amendments, and if this is something you think is a problem within Sunnyvale, I would definitely encourage you to let your legislators know that this is something you'd like to see revisited as AB 2011 moves forward, that you think the specific plans are not necessarily perfect and that neighborhood plans aren't necessarily perfect and infallible. And in fact, they might be improved by allowing some more housing. There's also, I saw there was a question about the application date. AB 20, most bills on this list are going into effect on January 1st. AB 2011 actually goes into effect in the middle of the year. And I don't know exactly why that was, although it's potentially relevant for the housing element adoption timeline. But most bills are taking effect on January 1st, but not AB 2011. It goes into effect in the middle of next year, and it sunsets after a decade.
Rita had a question.
No, I didn't have a question.
Okay, let's move over to Mike then. Mike Cerrone has a question.
Well, I think Angus had his hand up first, Gail.
Okay, let's go Angus, and then let's go to the chat, and then we'll go to Mike. Okay. Angus, you got a question?
I lied.
Angus, I'd talk to somebody about your haircut.
Yeah, well, you know. Hi, Aaron. So Richard Mellinger
Hi,
here.
Richard.
So I had a specific question about this. One of the major concerns that I've heard on the campaign trail is, how do we preserve retail? And how do we preserve neighborhood retail? And so with AB 2011 zoning essentially most commercial as residential, there's a real serious concern that this could wipe out our retail. And so the question I have for you is there any mechanism under this bill for a city to require a commercial component to future development such as ground floor retail?
Yes. So actually, great. I should have put this on the slides, but cities are allowed to require up to 50% of the ground floor be dedicated to retail or other commercial use. You can't require, they're not allowed to require more than that for a development that's proceeding through AB 2011, but they are allowed to require up to 50% on the ground floor, which, I think ought to be enough to get you your retail frontage, right? There's also sort of a recognition that we're going to see redevelopment of existing retail through this bill. And so there's provision to require relocation assistance to small businesses based on, I believe it's based on how long they've been in that location.
Fantastic. Aaron, I'm not going to take too much more time because I know there's a lot of questions, but could you shoot me an email about this offline? I would love to think more about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And
Thank you so much.
I'm trying to find the specific sections of the bill that both of those are lodged under. Of
Wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
course.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah,
Stephen,
and,
I was gonna do a chat question. Like,
okay.
Stephen Meyer, is the El Camino
I think we
specific-
addressed
Okay.
that one.
Okay, so another one is, what is the time frame for a city to approve a permit? And what is the exact date these bills are effective? Okay, I think we got the latter
Yeah.
part of that done, but what is the time frame for a city to approve a permit?
So cities have to respond either saying that they have approved or denied within 60 to 180 days. And the exact parameters there are, it's 60 days for a small development. I think, I don't remember the exact threshold, but small developments they have to respond in 60 days. Larger developments have to respond in 90 days. However, if they require a design review, that can be 90 to 180 days, I think. Again, with the same, it varies depending on the size of the development. And you would have to ask an actual land use lawyer if those timelines overlap or are additive, in which case I guess it could go up to 270 days. Yeah, that would be the longest possible time frame permitted under this. If a city doesn't respond within that time period, identifying why they're rejecting the development, it is deemed approved. And so, like, that's the clock. If they don't come up with a valid rejection within that time period, they've lost their speak now or forever hold your peace.
Okay, let's go to Mike, and then I've got a question, and then let's go to the next bill after that. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, Mike.
Okay, well, this follows up on what Richard was saying. I'm sure you know, Aaron, our mayor lobbied strongly against this bill. And the concern, which we've seen in a lot of other situations, is that we will lose retail. In fact, we've been watching the retail go away project by project, even before this bill passed, because the money is to be made in residential, not in retail. So, and that's why they, on the El Camino Real plan, they force some things to be commercial only, because if it was mixed use, it would only be residential. So we need the homes, but the residents are going to want services. And if our revenue base is disappearing, then it's going to make it more problematic to provide those services. So that was the concern. How do we keep from losing our retail base? The free market is not going to build any retail because there's no money to be made there.
Yeah, I think it's a real challenge. I'm not going to tell you I have like the best, like a full answer here. I think, we have a challenge where we've built this whole big box retail ecosystem, and it makes it harder for neighborhood retail because the big box is there already. And so transitioning out of that paradigm can be challenging. Cities are allowed to require retail frontage on these corridors. I've seen some reports that people think that retail vacancy is bottoming out and that, or peaking, I guess, and that there's a rebound of retail on the way. I can't evaluate how accurate that is. Certainly, there's a hope that as we build more housing on these commercial corridors and having more customers there will be beneficial to the remaining retail. But I understand that like we haven't necessarily seen that pan out in new developments. There's a lot of vacant retail in some of these new developments. I think this is also something where cities might have to be more flexible in terms of what types of retail spaces they permit and where they permit retail. I mean, I live in a neighborhood with corner stores and I can't imagine life without them. And most cities, most of their residential areas don't allow any type of retail, not a corner store, not a neighborhood cafe, nothing. So cities might consider being more flexible there. And also, I think I hope that the next bill I'm going to talk about, AB 2097, might also make things easier on retail, because right now, if you want to open a restaurant, you have to provide more square footage of parking than your actual restaurant in most cities. And that's true for a lot of different retail types. So that's something I think cities can also look at. Like for all that they're encouraging retail in some way, there are barriers in their codes that are also an obstacle to retail being successful and operating in atypical spaces where there might be potential.
Yeah, and just as you described, even if we ignore the revenues, those are amenities for those neighborhoods, those retail outlets. And if essentially as we kill the retail, we're turning opportunity zones, high opportunity zones, into medium or low opportunity zones by doing that, which is what affirmative fair housing is supposed to be addressing. So anyway, thanks.
So my
Yeah.
question is, where do you think this is going to have the most effect, and in what cities?
Yeah, I think El Camino is one big, just the whole length of the peninsula. One of the big proponents of this idea, Peter Calthorpe, who has been pushing this idea for El Camino for a long time. I was talking with some people in Southern California today. I think there's some, like, Orange County has like a massive grid of commercial corridors that run the length of the county. But I also think to some degree we'll find out, right? There's a question about, do we anticipate market rate developers using this? I hope so. The goal of this bill is for it to be usable by market rate developers. I was talking to someone from the Carpenters. He was very clear about that. He's like, we don't benefit if nobody uses this bill, because in order for our workers to get paid, there has to be work. Now, if we find that nobody is taking advantage of the provisions of this bill, then that tells us something, that the policy has been calibrated wrong and we need to revisit it. And that's something I think we have seen the legislature be willing to do on ADUs. And I hope they will be willing to do on some of the major legislation like AB 2011 and SB 9 that they've passed over the last 2 years, because it's very rare that they get it perfectly right on the first go. And that ability and willingness to iterate and keep improving and fixing the problems that come up is really important to long-term successful policy.
Okay, Aaron, you want to move on to the next bill, and then we'll get questions after this bill, and then we'll move on to the next bill. Thanks.
Yeah, and Chuck, if the next bills will not take so long. So if you end up still having a question about AB 2011, we can talk to it after these. So I'm going to go through all the next bills all together.
Okay.
It'll be a little less, each one will be a little quicker than the last. So AB 2097, as I said, is a bill that's very near to my heart. This is the issue that got me into land use. Is this question of why is it so hard to live without a car in our cities? And when that seems to be the kind of thing we should be encouraging and making easier. One of the reasons is that our cities have policies to support car ownership built into their land use codes. They require a minimum amount of parking for every new building, even when it's right on top of a transit station. That doesn't make sense to us when you look at the fact that that means there's more people driving, there's more local air pollution, carbon pollution, the streets are less safe, and it makes everything more expensive, particularly housing. Structured parking, you're looking at easily $50,000 a parking space. And for development in Sunnyvale, you are going to need structured parking. So AB 2097 says, this doesn't make sense. Let's stop requiring it. It eliminates minimum parking requirements for residential, retail, and commercial development within a half mile of major transit stops. I'll show a map of the major transit stops in Sunnyvale on the next slide, but you should basically be thinking of that primarily as rail stations. BART, Caltrain, VTA light rail. There's also BRT can be considered under that, as well as the intersection of two frequent transit routes. But in Sunnyvale, you're really going to be looking primarily at Caltrain and VTA light rail. There are a couple of sort of carve outs within that elimination of parking minimums. If cities require a certain amount of ADA accessible parking, that mandate remains in place. If they require a certain amount of electric vehicle parking, that mandate can remain in place. And there is a provision for cities to make findings that allow them to require parking if they find it's going to be like the approval without parking would create a specific list of harms. However, that is waived if the development provides on-site affordable housing at least 20%. That can be at any affordability level. So the idea here is any development that is providing on-site affordable housing should be able to avail itself and using the state density bonus should be able to avail itself of this provision without any trouble. And for others, maybe there's going to be an incentive. I'll say I have some issues personally with that provision. It's not something that California YIMBY sought, but it was something that we were, I think it's a little, as it's drafted, a little sloppy, but it was something we were required to incorporate. There's a whole long conversation to be had about this standard of parking minimums, but we don't have to go into that. This is the map of major transit stops in the Sunnyvale area. So you can see the Caltrain corridor, you can see the VTA light rail corridor, and it looks like there's a couple of bus stops on El Camino that also qualify. This is the half-mile radius. Yeah, so within those areas, there is no longer a requirement for minimum parking for residential, retail, or commercial development. Those are also notably the areas in which AB 2011 is most permissive, where mixed income developments have to be built to at least 80 dwelling units an acre, and cities have to allow them to go up to 65 feet, although it won't be within that full radius because only on the qualifying commercial corridors. Moving on quickly then, 3 more bills that we sponsored and worked on. AB 2221, which continues to refine state ADU laws, which I think have been the most successful state housing bill to date. There was an article about this from our research director at California YIMBY recently in The Atlantic, but tens of thousands of new homes being built per year through ADU law. This is designed to make it, this is based on some issues we heard from ADU practitioners, people who build ADUs, of issues that they were encountering. The idea here is to make it easier for them so that if you as a homeowner are seeking to add an ADU, you won't even notice any difference except that things have gotten easier for you. SB 886 is a bill to address the student housing crisis in particular. As many as 10% of students in the UC Cal State system have been homeless at some point during their education. That's just terrible. We've invested so much in producing these amazing institutes of higher education in the state, and kids cannot take advantage of them fully if they are sleeping in a car or a broom closet, which are shockingly common situations. One of my colleagues is currently a student at UC Santa Cruz, wrote about his experience, shared something he heard from fellow students there, and it was harrowing. So this allows the UC and Cal State campuses to build student housing within their long-range development plan without having to do an environmental impact report. without the opportunity for somebody to file a CEQA lawsuit. Then lastly, AB 2873 is a bill that we worked on to try to understand to what extent are underrepresented and underserved communities benefiting from the contracting opportunities provided through building affordable, the money the state spends building affordable housing. So I'm going to go back to my first page with this list of bills. And yeah, people have questions.
Jordan, do you want to ask your question that you have on chat, please?
Oh, I didn't have a question. I just wanted to, I had seen in the chat the question about market rate developers taking whether developers would be able to take advantage of AB 2011 due to the prevailing wage standards. And I had opined in the chat that I think it's likely that with the cost savings of 2011 in other avenues, particularly around the density bonuses that come with 2011, the reduced parking standards, as well as the by right nature of the bill, meaning that developers don't have to go through the rigmarole that they normally would. Hopefully that is enough cost savings to, and likely will be enough cost savings to allow them to pay prevailing wages and still make a profit on the project.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay,
to Jordan's point, this is the first bill we've seen that combines both zoning relief and process relief. So it's kind of a double whammy. I will say though, if those of you, if any of you here are developers or work with developers and you're hearing about, we want to hear about pain points. And like, if they're trying to use this process and finding themselves unable to do so, we want to hear about that because we want it to work. So I'm dropping my email in the chat.
Okay, so I'm going to do Chuck first and then Martin, Chuck and then Martin, and then we'll go to the next person. Okay, so Chuck first, then Martin.
All right. Yeah, I just had a kind of a follow-up on the El Camino discussion. So there's parts of El Camino that are commercial only and parts that are mixed use under the El Camino, the new El Camino Real plan that was approved. And you kind of mentioned like the commercial may be protected from AB 2011 because they're commercial only. For the mixed use, would AB 2011 apply to the mixed use areas along El Camino? And then things like the height and density and setback requirements, would those supersede what's in the specific plan, or would the specific plan take precedence?
So the specific wording in AB 2011 is that it doesn't apply if there is an adopted neighborhood plan that does not allow multifamily housing. And again, not a lawyer. If you want to pursue a development here, please talk to a land use attorney. But my read of that is that on a property that is part of a neighborhood plan, but does allow multifamily housing and also allows meets the qualifying uses standards of commercial, retail, or parking. But if it allows those uses and allows multifamily housing within the neighborhood plan, it would still be subject to AB 2011. That is my read of the language.
Okay. And so like if the El Camino plan said it was only 60 units per acre, but AB 2011 said it could go up to, I think it was whatever, 80 units, then
yeah, and
2011 limits would apply?
That is my understanding, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next question from Martin.
You're still on mute, Martin.
Sorry.
Thank you.
The evening after Yom Kippur, my brain is not completely fired up yet. AB 29, could you go back to the AB 2097 map, please?
Yeah.
Okay, so if I'm looking at that, reading this right, would this apply to most of the Moffett Park area? Because of the light rail.
Probably.
Okay, so when the Moffett Park specific plan comes out, would it, I assume I assume based the parking and most of it would be subject to AB 2097 reforms, and language to the contrary would be basically completely pointless.
I think it would make a lot of sense if you are adopting a plan right now to line it up with the state law here and just don't have the minimum parking requirements, because yeah, you generally will not be able to enforce them.
Yeah, and Colleen, to your point, I'm aware of how Moffett is zoned now. I'm talking about how we are going to be rezoning Moffett in the next several months.
Yeah,
Is we're
Yeah,
adding like 20,000 homes, so
I know it's a really exciting
yeah.
proposal, and yeah, I think
No,
it's
I'm
a great opportunity
excited
to-
about having more ammunition to push back on parking requirements. So
Absolutely. Yeah, what's the point of
Yeah.
having a provision in the law that you can't enforce? It's just confusion and angst.
no, I'm excited about this. So thank you.
The next question, I think, is Julia. And then, let me see here. I'm having problems getting my thing to work here. Let's do Julia and then Donna. Donna, well, she disappeared. Donna Beers, did you have a question? So let's do Julia and then Donna if she still has a question.
I didn't have a question. My hand was not up.
Okay, Julie, you want to start? You want to go?
Okay, hi
Thank you.
Aaron. I was wondering in the bill for ADUs, there was something about onerous front setback or front yard or something. I was wondering what that meant.
Yeah, so I actually don't know the full details of this. I didn't delve deep into this bill because it was mostly a non-controversial one that we weren't mobilizing people for. But what I do know is cities are very limited in their ability to set side and rear setback requirements for ADUs. But there isn't a limit on their ability to require front setbacks. And so this is, I think, cleaning that up. I think the original intent of that was to not have ADUs in front yards. And I think my assumption is that AB 2221 preserves that intent, because I think it would have been more controversial otherwise. But you could imagine a city that requires, oh, you have to separate the ADU from the main house by 30 feet. And then, oh, wow, oops, you can't fit an ADU in that situation. So I think that is what it's referring to. But if there's an issue on that area that you've been encountering that you like some more clarity on, I'm happy to follow up after.
Okay, so onerous is just it's not the word
Difficult.
used in the bill. I mean, it's not the
Yeah,
word
no.
in the bill.
It's
There's more.
It's flavor text.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. Yes, I would like to learn more about it. Thank you.
great.
Yeah, I have a great suggestion for you, Aaron. If you could get YIMBY to come up with a great forum for us, that would be great. And
Yeah, we've done
we
those in
could
the
work-
past.
Yeah, we can work with you to come up with some local speakers, but because these bills are really fundamentally very important. And if we added 9 from last year, I think we could have a really powerful discussion about housing.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any more questions? Yes, Agnes has her hand up and then Mike.
So Aaron, do you know if there are any bills in the works to prohibit property owners in cities and towns with state and UC campuses from renting their homes as mini dorms?
I'm not aware of anything on that front. I think fundamentally the solution there is we need to provide more student housing.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I see another. Mike, you want to go next?
Well, yeah, I'm just wondering, as an overall question, Aaron, is there a concern that with all of these bills, and each one of them, you can look at it and say, well, that makes sense, we want to do that. But they're sometimes long bills with complicated interlocking requirements, how close are you to transit? And I mean, there's just a lot of different things. Is the complexity of it discouraging housing development just because the developers don't, they don't quite understand what to expect, and presumably next year there's going to be another bunch of bills, and some of these like SB 330 and well even SB 35 really change the requirements or the environment for building housing or building anything, and you know how business hates uncertainty. So I'm just wondering, is there any talk about, going back and resolving conflicts or something else, so that I almost think sometimes they'd rather, have it clear what they're supposed to do than necessarily get the most financially favorable thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's an issue with these bills of developers not always being aware, or property owners or homeowners not always being aware of what their options are. Most of these bills, the way they're structured is they provide additional options and they don't close off anything that was possible before. There are a few exceptions. SB 330 is a notable one there, in that it prohibits certain actions. But so to that extent, I think, if you've got a working business model, you can probably continue it, but you may have a lot of new things you can do through state law that it's important for developers and property owners to be aware of, so that we can get the most out of these bills. In terms of like conflicting provisions, I will say generally legislative staff are pretty good about seeking out chaptering conflicts in bills and making sure that there's not a provision of one bill that invalidates the provision of another bill, or they're making contradictory amendments to the same piece of code. Not to say it never happens, but also typically the legislature cleans that up pretty quickly. And then, like, stepping back out, I think we're going to see continued activity from the legislature on housing, simply because the crisis continues. And we've made a lot of progress this year on the policy front, but until we see that progress reflected in home building and housing costs, we're going to need to keep doing more. And we're not seeing that yet. And, we haven't had a chance for these bills to go into effect. Maybe 2 years from now, we'll be looking back and saying 2022 was the year that we turned the tide on the housing crisis in California. But until we see that concretely reflected in growing home building and falling housing costs, I think the legislature is going to continue to be active, because they are hearing from their constituents, this is a big problem and you have to do something about it.
Aaron,
So if you're
sorry.
Well, if you're a developer planning development, let's say a village center in Sunnyvale, and we are actively lobbying to get the height of the village centers higher, right? The housing units per acre. And but on the other hand, if I was a developer and looking at this, I might say, another in 6 months, I might be able to build something twice as high or whatever. I'm just going to wait. So if developers think that the legislature next year or the year after is going to come up with much more favorable terms, that might they also might tend to back off and just wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I think, that sort of speculative landholding is a real issue. And I think that's why we need to reform Prop 13 and provide an extra incentive for people who are sitting on land and not using it fully to get to work. Everyone works except the vacant lot.
Yeah, Aaron, is Quirk Silva? I heard she was timing out. Is she timing out, or is she coming back for another?
I don't think she's out. I don't think she's out yet. Bill Quirk is retiring. He's local here in the Bay Area. Sharon Quirk Silva in Orange County, I think, is remaining in the legislature.
Could you talk a little bit, and I hope I'm not taking up too much time here. Could you talk a little bit about how you find sponsors for the legislation that you want passed?
Yeah, I'm not myself directly very involved in that. There are legislators we work with over and over again. So I think we've had a bill that we sponsored, authored by Scott Wiener, I think every year of California, or no, I think actually not our first year, but every year that I've been at California, we've had a bill authored with Scott Wiener. Buffy Wicks is someone we work with a lot, Nancy Skinner. Sharon Quirk Silva is someone who's really like been getting more and more interested in housing as an issue. And so we saw an opportunity to work with her, and I think we are hoping to get a chance to work with her again. Laura Friedman is someone who really took an interest in the parking issue specifically. And it was great, honestly, to have an LA author on that bill. If it had been a Bay Area author, I think we would have gotten a lot of Bay Area versus Southern California culture war. The people in the Bay Area just don't understand how important cars are to us in Southern California. And because we had an author from the Los Angeles area, not that we didn't hear some of those arguments, but they had less traction.
Okay, do you want to move
Quirk
into,
Silver is
plug
not
for-
termed out until 2026.
okay,
Thanks,
do you
Martin.
want to move into a plug for California NIMBY, and then we'll move along? Thank you.
Yeah. So, if these bills seem good to you and like they're doing important things for California, this is the core substance of our work. And we cannot do that work successfully without local partners who can help us bring pressure to bear and district on legislators. So we've worked with Livable Sunnyvale in the past on our legislative priorities. We'd love to continue working with you in the future. We have a lot of ways we can formalize that process and bring you in. I think Angus actually has been attending our legislative strategy calls, attended our YIMBY Summit where we discussed some of our policy priorities for next year. And we would love to continue working with Livable Sunnyvale in all these ways.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to turn the meeting back to Angela. Thank you very much, Erin.
Thank you, Aaron. Yes, we want to continue working, and I think this was very helpful and educational. So thank you for your time. Our procedure now is that we would vote at the next meeting, though we want to amend that so we could actually vote while the information is fresh. But our policy right now is to vote next meeting. So stay tuned, I guess.
Great.
Thank you.
Look forward to staying in touch. I'm gonna run down and have dinner, but my email's in the chat. Please don't hesitate to be in touch. And I know a number of you also have my contact information already. So look forward to continuing to work with Livable Sunnyvale. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will move on to the Moffett Park specific plan update. And I believe that is Agnes.
Yes, it's me. Mike's going to show the slides, right, Mike? Mike, you're muted.
Right, here we go. And let me go to presentation mode.
Okay, so I wanted to say some of you probably attended the Moffett Park committee meetings that Justin started a couple of years ago. And when he needed to back away from this committee responsibility, Gail stepped up to be chair, and then I in turn offered my help to Gail. So now Gail and I co-chair the Moffett Park committee. We had a study session recently, as you can see from this slide, on the 20th, and information was presented by Michelle King, who is a principal planner for Sunnyvale, and she's overseeing the Moffett Park as well as consultants that the city has hired. It was an incredibly dense presentation. Gail and I were talking about how much data was given and how quickly it was gone over. There were over 100 slides. And so rather than show 100 slides to all of you, which this is, by the way, a heavier lift than Moffett Park itself will be. I have picked one slide that I think synthesizes what was discussed in the salient points of that session. Is it stuck, Mike?
No.
Oh, there we go. So when we were talking about mobility goals, in a nutshell, what is trying to be done is to get people to Moffett and to get people around Moffett. And to do this using different types of transportation than single occupancy vehicle transportation into Moffett. So some of the things that were talked about was a system that will accommodate the changing needs of Moffett, because as we all know, if we're building, as an example, 20,000 homes, we're not going to have 20,000 homes built within a year, and then we're not going to have, say, 40,000 people living there. So over time, the goal is to adjust the transportation needs based on both the residents and also based on the businesses that are in Moffett. And thankfully, they're talking about safer bike lanes to going into Moffett. They're talking about a transportation network, and they've talked about this for quite some time, that is convenient and connected throughout the city. So oftentimes they say going from downtown Sunnyvale to Moffett, but I am hoping they extend that beyond, which I think their goal is, to having transportation system that again meets not just the immediate needs of Moffett, but the long-term needs of Moffett. One of the kind of, I don't want to say sticking points, but the topics that was talked about a lot was parking. And it was the goal of the consultants, and Michelle brought this up as well, to make sure that we have, as I would call it, right-sized parking, that we don't have parking that we don't need. So a transportation demand management concept would be to look at parking throughout the life of Moffett Park. And what they want to do, as I had said, they want to have more of a right-sized parking. They are also planning on having a transportation management association. So that gets to a little bit more of a granular level, where you would have businesses within Moffett, and hopefully there would be some residential organizations that would be part of this. They call it a TMA, to help talk about transportation needs and to incentivize people to maybe use more public transportation than driving, maybe by giving them Caltrain passes or having shuttles that would connect from Caltrain to Moffett Park. So those were the things that were talked about in regard to mobility goals. So that pretty much synthesizes over 100 slides into one. And Mike, if you want to show the last one. So Moffett Park, as we all know, is a huge deal for Sunnyvale. It, at least in my lifetime, and maybe some of the rest of you, it literally is a once in a lifetime chance to get this right. We can have Moffett Park be a model for the county, for the state, for the rest of the country, but it can't be a model for what we think will be good unless we voice our opinions. So I would really like to encourage all of you to come to the study sessions that the city is sponsoring, and to also join the committee that Gail and I are chairing. So Gail, did you want to talk about our committee and our next meeting and what we're looking at doing?
Sure. Yeah, our next meeting is on the 13th, and we're going to address the next study session, which is the 18th of October, before the city council, and it's on affordable housing and community benefit. And I don't know what community benefit means, so I can't talk about that. But I know what affordable housing is. So we're going to have two speakers. That's Pilar Lorenzana. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce her name very well.
Yeah, I think that's right.
and Michelle King. They'll be there to talk. We usually schedule these just for an hour, so I don't want to take, and we usually do it at 5:30 because Michelle King lives in Brooklyn and we don't want to keep her up. And we want to make sure that she can watch, one of the nighttime funny shows. So please come, email me. I'll put my email or just email. I'll put my email in the chat. Email me to be part of the list. As Agnes said, if we don't talk, no one's going to listen. It'll be the sound of one hand clapping. We had a meeting on, was it Monday or I can't remember days now. We had a meeting with the city. I think it was Monday, and 6 people from Livable Sunnyvale were there, which is great. So come one, come all. This is a long process. You don't have to come to every single meeting, but do get involved. So I'll put my email. Please join us. It's your time to have a good time.
And I just want to add one other thing, that when we were discussing the mobility issues that were going to be talked about at the study session, I found it personally really helpful to kind of get a hint and a view of what was going to be talked about, so I could then give consideration to what I thought was important and then speak before council. We only got 90 seconds. So I would encourage all of you, when you come and speak for council, maybe you want to think about 90 seconds, because that seems to be recently what we're getting, although of course council members can go on ad nauseum. But I would encourage you to come because it gives you a really nice preview of what will be talked about at the study session. So that's it. Thank you.
Unless there's any questions about anything Agnes presented, don't see any hands.
I just want to mention one more thing if I can. So what we're trying to do now is after the 18th, we'll plan another meeting where Agnes and I want to get everyone's feedback on what they felt. And we're going to figure out a way that we can get our feelings about both the mobility and then the affordable housing and the community benefit. We'll figure out a way to get our thoughts on all of these issues back to the city council and to the people that are running, Michelle King's group. It's really important that I'm calling them like data dump meetings where we talk. We had a great session. I can't remember the date. Sorry. There were about 9 of us on the call, and we really came up with a lot of mobility issues that are really important for us in the city. So just get on the email list, and that way you'll know what's going on. You don't have to attend every single meeting. No pain, no gain here. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then underlying all this stuff is the housing element, or sort of the housing element. So I think it's Chuck that's going to speak a little bit about the housing element update.
Yeah. Agnes and I were the co-chairs of the Housing Element Committee. And recently, on September 20th, we met with Sean Danino, and he is one of the staff at the state HCD that's reviewing Sunnyvale's housing element. Most of the stuff we talked about, we primarily focused on the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirements for the housing element. And in particular, we had sent a letter into HCD, and one of the issues that we highlighted was over 90% of the affordable units in the housing element are concentrated in low-income areas of Sunnyvale. But the AFH requirements seem to indicate that the affordable units are supposed to be distributed kind of throughout the city, not concentrated in the areas that are lower income. And so we talked with him a little bit about that. He seemed fairly receptive to those comments. And we'll kind of find out HCD's actually final answer on the housing element tomorrow. We talked with him a little bit about the process. So the city submitted the housing element to HCD back in July, and HCD has until October 6th, which is tomorrow, to issue their response to the housing element. So they can either approve it or they can deny it. Generally, it's expected that the first that they'll deny this initial submission. I think virtually all jurisdictions throughout the state of California, HCD has not approved their first submission. So it's generally expected that HCD will come back and say, hey, you need to keep working on this and have some suggestions for what they'd like to see changed. And so once we get that letter tomorrow, we'll kind of be looking at that and then see how the city responds. The city will then take that back, make some changes to the housing element and resubmit it again. And that'll be kind of an ongoing process until the final housing element gets adopted. And that's it.
Thank you.